Chaps, we're going to talk about suicide, and I think we're kind of going to back up why we don't talk about suicide that much as a men's mental health charity. So what we've done is we've invited Susie Bennett, who's an amazing person, did a talk with her a few weeks ago, and he did a PhD on, in a nutshell, why do men kill themselves?
Yeah, essentially. So I just finished, it was a 4-year PhD, and then before that, I did my master's on the same topic, basically, trying to understand um, male suicide risk factors and what we can collectively do as human beings, as communities, as societies to support men in sort of suicidal pain better. And Dan, it has changed my life in so many ways. Changed the way I see the world, changed my relationships. Been incredibly kind of, well, as you can imagine, and as you know, like working in what you work in, just it's incredibly sort of moving, painful, inspiring at the same time. How courageous people are with their pain and wanting things to be different. So yeah, that's a tangent, but yes, that's my area. I was going to say of work, but it's kind of like my just area of life because it's sort
Well,
of taken over everything.
well, tell me about it. You'll get
Yeah.
me from me. I started a bloody charity. It
Yeah.
literally once you start biting, isn't it? And
You
people start
can't
taking it.
stop.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did it change your life? Just out of interest.
Um, in so many ways. I think in a very profound way. I always say to people always ask me, or they think that studying suicide is very depressing and distressing. And of course there's so many moments when your heart breaks for so many people. And so there is undeniably just a distressing element to it. But also, and I said this before, like there's so much wisdom that I've experienced in men who are suicidal, because the men who are suicidal are really engaged with the things that matter most in life, because often those are the things that they cannot access. And so in those conversations, they're reminding you all of the time of the things that are meaningful to life. So they help orientate me as a human being in the direction of things that give existence meaning, if that makes sense. So there's, on that level, it's sort of deep in my life. And then also, as a woman studying the male experience, I mean, it's completely changed my life. I feel like I'm in the same world, but it's kind of flipped. It's flipped upside down, and I still move in exactly the same kind of physical landscapes, but my psychological reading, I suppose, of people and situations is completely different. And I think one of the things that I feel most kind of passionate about in a way is to try and bring people to the landscape that I now inhabit, for them to see the world as I've been allowed to see it, in relation to how men can move in the world, and so many things that were invisible to me, before, that
Yeah.
I didn't see. So yeah, it changed me really deeply.
Absolutely. I can relate to a lot of that stuff because, yeah, with me on BPD and all this kind of stuff, and struggled in silence, really. Especially with a lot of the high functioning depression. Like, absolutely, I've tried to kill myself 3 times.
Right.
Over the years. Thankfully, not a long, not thankfully not for a long time. But I've got faith as well, so I kind of have
Okay.
that little bit of shame as well. Is
Yeah.
actually that made things a lot harder. I think personally that made a lot of things actually quite a bit harder.
Because you felt.
I think it's because I do believe in God. I'm a Christian. I'm not one of these preachy people and all this kind of stuff as well. And obviously, there's a lot of talk, especially in churches. Oh, it's a sin, you're burning hell, and all this kind of stuff. So I don't think that conversation helps.
Right. And have you always been religious? So the points when you were
I think I've always had some sort of belief, if I'm honest with you, but
yeah,
I'd say I've got faith than religious. I think
right.
religion's
Yeah.
very much rules. You're going to go to hell. I'm very much about forgiveness and let people make mistakes and all this kind of stuff as well. So for me, kind of shut away my being open about mental health
Mm,
about myself. So just kind of like, yeah, just I think I remember the last time when I OD'd, literally I went through a breakup, I went through this and just my life changed. I'm like, I'm just done.
mm,
Literally just done. It's just I can't get out of this one. So let's just call it a day. And I think
mm,
this is what I've said, and I've taken some flack for it. What I've said, the many conversations what I've had with thankfully people who have survived, I'll always ask them one question like, what do you know now? What would have stopped you jumping out the loft or jumping off the bridge or trying to drown yourself? That was a bizarre story. And all of them have said nothing.
right.
And this is why it goes, I don't know, it just kind of reinforces,
Okay.
and I'm happy to be right, it just reinforces that I think we presume suicides, especially with men, that they've just completely lost the plot, they're crying and they've lost control. Now, I really don't think that many conversations I've had that just isn't the case. I'm well aware there's some mental health conditions where it's the psychosis and all this kind of stuff where actually most of them I really don't think it's how suicide is what we think it is. It's actually a really logical decision. It's an illogical decision, but I've been in that mindset. Am I making sense of
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think that um it's always really difficult speaking about suicide because it's so complicated and so many different. If if this if suicide were a doorway, there are a million different pathways that can lead to it, and then there are a million different lives that lead to it. And people, like you say, people can have really pronounced and extreme and destabilizing mental health situations, and for other people, it can be, I've had conversations with people where they felt incredibly calm in the, in the lead up to a
yeah.
suicide attempt, and a sense of kind of almost, peace that they'd come to a decision.
So
And then
that's
other people,
yeah. See, that's terrifying, isn't it?
it is, and I hear what you're saying, that you're trying to position yourself before you people get
Yeah,
to that point. And
absolutely.
I think that's one of the most interesting theories that I think that there is in relation to suicide, which helps me on a personal level as well, is it's called the fluid vulnerability model, but it basically says that every human being has a baseline risk for suicide. I have a baseline risk for suicide. You do, Dan. Every single person listening or watching this carries a baseline risk for suicide because we're all human beings living potentially painful lives. So we're all going to be exposed to things in our lives that cause us pain. And that for some of us, that baseline risk will get higher and higher because of the amount of pain that we're exposed to and the tools that we have or don't have to regulate that pain. And I picture it as kind of like a tank. So I imagine I've got a tank of pain inside. And as that pain gets higher and higher and higher, it's going to reach a threshold, which the theory describes as active suicidal mode. So when you're in the active suicidal mode, you are then at danger. The pain is so high, you're at danger of doing something to yourself in relation to trying to resolve that pain. And when that pain is so high, like I know every time I'm in acute pain, my ability to make decisions is now compromised because I am so consumed with this feeling of pain. And
Mhm.
so that's where I think your point of like it being an illogical potential decision is because your decision making abilities are compromised because of the level of pain that you're in. But it can feel like a logical thing to do with your pain because you can't see any other options for resolving it. And the purpose of pain is to get us to do something, to end it. And so what I believe you're trying to do is get people when they're in that baseline, when they're not in that acute suicidal mode, but you're in the sort of baseline risk area, to stop that pain from rising into that threshold, because when you are over that threshold, you are in a state of mind that I think is sometimes it's almost out of body, because the pain is so consuming that it's incredibly difficult to manage and regulate. And my heart goes out so fully to anybody that's living through that at the moment. And the thing that I like about this theory, just to finish it off, is it then gives you kind of two targets or two strategies for how to deal with suicidal feeling. The first strategy is around, what do you do when your active suicidal mode is activated? Because in that period, the main thing is, what can you do to keep yourself safe? Because often when we come back into our baseline risk, often, we are glad potentially that we didn't follow through with the decision we wanted to make when we were in the active suicidal mode. So when you're in that active suicidal mode, it's about the tools and strategies to keep you safe in that very, very short term, in that immediate present. What can be done to keep you safe? And then a second set of tools and strategies around, how do you reduce that baseline risk? How do you deal with the level of pain that you're being exposed to in your life? How do you get better tools to regulate it, and stop yourself ever getting near to that kind of threshold again? I find that theory very kind of useful, and I think there's spaces for all different kinds of organizations along that journey to come in and have communities and interventions and support. And I think what you're doing is really an important part of that. And I absolutely hear what you're saying, that like, let's have the conversation before we get to that point.
I think so, because I think my other tipping point, because this all started when Keith Flint died.
Right.
That was a tipping point, and I remember that because back then in 4th of March 2019, because I knew Keith, and also we weren't best mates or whatever else. It was just I was in the DJ scene and then the motorbike racing scene, so we kind of bounced around each other quite a lot, and we DJed at a certain place. But anyway, and when I got a text message to say, "Oh, Keith's gone," I remember I was in the office. I was just like, "Oh, bloody hell, not another one." And I started speaking. I was just like, and I was like, "What do you mean, not another one?" I was like, "Oh no, loads of people kill themselves." Like, well, how many? And I literally started, it was 20. And this was in 2019. And
That you knew personally, Dan?
I knew her personally.
Wow.
I'd been to most of those funerals, but I
Wow.
put it down because I was raised in, I use the term raised loosely, but I was in the care system.
Okay.
So I was in that world where, yet again, that was just abuse and everything else was just normal. And people talking themselves every 5 minutes. It's straight. It sounds weird talking about it like it was normal, but you got to bear in mind, in my life, that was normal then. And whatever else. So I'll put it down to that. Now I was in the rave scene, like the illegal rave scene, running illegal raves, legal raves, park radio. So the drug scene basically. So yeah, again, it was just normal. I didn't know anything different. So anyway, it's when that happened, and whoever I was with said, "Ben, that's not normal, mate." I started Googling the stats, and I remember looking at a press release from the government, and it said, "We're really good because we're getting suicide rates down." And everyone's like, "Oh, this is absolutely wonderful." Obviously, I can't do politics because we're a charity and all this kind of stuff. But I'm only going to talk about that thing. But it frustrated me because I'm like, well, okay, we seem to be focused on the instant suicide.
Yeah.
But back then, I was running a soup kitchen. I had like 60 volunteers and all this kind of stuff as well. And most of the clientele, or the guests as we call them, were hard on drink. They were hard on drugs. But in my head, they were killing themselves. Just not that instant thing, but they're not being. I just found they weren't being recorded anywhere. And most of those stories, actually, you build a relationship with them. But most of those stories, you start talking to them. It's like, well, why are you here, mate? You seem clever and all this kind of stuff, blah blah blah. Same old story that they just went off the rails a few years ago. Either they didn't admit it or nobody noticed. Doesn't whatever story people want to choose. And I'm just like, that could have been prevented. Not all of them, let's face it. We can't save everybody. So that's our attitude. Of just like trying to nip that in the bud. Of just learn to talk a bit, more. And one of the things what I did notice, especially in a straight relationship, like suicides and relationships are quite linked, aren't they? It's just like, well, what if we change our terminology rather than telling, let's just pick on straight relationships, but rather than telling women, listen, 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 we tell the blokes to nip it in the bud early. And I've said very vocally before, people take the mickey now. I say in a straight relationship, the minute a bloke starts acting weird, different, or whatever else, she'll start doubting herself and she'll know something's wrong probably before he does.
Right.
So we flip it on its head and say, so what we suggest to do is tell her that something's a bit wonky, because if you don't, she'll speak to her friends, or even worse, her mum. And if you've got mum saying, no, it's not you, love, it's him, you've
Yeah.
got a relationship problem at the same time. And then that's where that roller coaster starts happening.
Yeah.
So we say, just tell her early, even if I'm brave enough to say to my wife, you're doing my head in.
Yeah.
Literally, can you go to your mum's, go out or do something? And we've got that kind of relation. We've got that
Yeah.
relationship now. So that's what we try to do.
And how did that change come about for you, Dan? Like, what was your journey? You mentioned it earlier that you made, was it three
Three
attempts in
attempts, yeah.
parts? Yeah. And so can you think of significant things that shifted for you in terms of how your behavior changed, or
What
how have you made that pain manageable to live with?
I didn't until the 4th of March 2019.
Right.
It was because I hid it, and I remember I was interviewed by because basically back then was just a one-off event. I had no dreams to start a charity and all this kind of stuff. So if anyone thinks starting a charity is wonderful and you're saving the world, trust me, don't. It's an absolute bloody nightmare, it really is. We really are an accidental charity, but anyway, it was because I wanted to do this event, which was I wanted to get 1,000 men in a field, hand up under a drone, say it's okay, it's not be okay, blah blah blah. And then I was interviewed by the BBC, and I think that reporter was just like, "Why are you doing it?" And then I was like, and I couldn't feel like a fraud, so I was like, "Well, I've had like 30 odd years of living with high function depression, well, not with like depression and BPD and all of this kind of stuff." So I kind of just let it all out. And at that moment, I literally to the nation on BBC
Wow.
Reports.
And
Is
that's sorry, was that one of the first times you
yeah,
disclosed that?
yeah,
Wow.
absolutely. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that I'm not suggesting that
Yeah, the BBC.
everybody else does that. Because funny
Yeah.
enough, as one of our safeguarding things, if somebody asks to be in one of our videos, they must have publicly said something about their own mental health. Because the amount of people we get where they want to use MANUP to announce their mental health, it's like, have you spoken to your missus or your
Yeah.
boyfriend? So,
Okay.
oh, no,
Yeah.
no, not yet. And it's like it's just not appropriate. So my example was very, very extreme.
Unusual. Yeah. And how did you feel afterwards? Because that is public, right?
Yeah, no, yeah, it was literally all over the place. It started going to the press and all sorts. For the first couple of weeks, I was so nervous about losing clients.
Right.
I'm not going to lie, I lost one client after about 2 months for it, because they got bored of me talking about mental health. But actually, I felt a massive load off. And
Mm.
you know what? Since I've got a much better relationship with my own child, I've got two boys. I've got a much better relationship with my boys, and I guess I had to take the approach of lead by example.
Mm.
For me, it's about integrity. If I haven't got integrity, I've got nothing else.
Mm.
And that's something yet again, hence why like, the true meaning of man up is to deal with
Mm.
is to be brave enough to deal with an unpleasant or an awkward situation.
Mm.
So I had to lead by example.
Mm.
Did I answer that question or just avoid it?
Yeah, no. It's really moving. Can you remember that feeling? Because obviously now you're very articulate and open about how you felt and struggles that you've had. But can you remember that feeling? You know, when you feel, I often think this sometimes you and I could say the same thing, but for me to say those words out loud, I've had to climb Mount Everest in my mind.
Yeah,
And for
absolutely.
somebody else, they've just had to open the front door and out it came. And we never know really when we're in conversation with one another what the other is climbing to get certain words out of their mouth. And do you remember that feeling when it was a Mount Everest, and it almost felt impossible to the thought of saying out loud some of the things that you now say?
Oh, absolutely. It was absolutely horrific.
Yeah,
I remember the shame bit building up and shutting people away and all this kind of stuff. It was really, really bad. I remember, but it's just, but I found I'm one of these people where if I was working or back then was DJing, I could go into my DJ mode, Dan Doolittle. I could be the
right.
DJ. Didn't have to deal with stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, again, something I've said people with mental health are the biggest actors. They're genius actors, absolutely genius actors. And I think that's the problem. And this is what frustrates me about of with a lot of mental health talk, jibber jabber. LinkedIn is the worst for it. It's all tick lists. This is what you should be doing.
yeah, yeah,
This is what depression looks like. I'm like,
right,
no, it's not. When I was in my darkest moments of literally swallowing pills to try and
yeah,
call it a day, that day I was like dark blue on like this salesman board. I was the best salesman in the call center.
right.
At night time, I was going to and DJing at Camden Palais, Bagley's, and Ministry of Sound, and all this kind of stuff. And then I attempted when I got home. So
Wow.
from the outside, absolutely, everyone was like, "He's really, really good at what he's doing.
Mm.
Well, let's go and watch him DJ later." Not one of those what is depression tick list applied to me, and I'm starting to see more and more people like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I mean, that's why what you do, Dan's so important, like, because you can speak the language
yeah,
in a way that people, that people can understand and resonate and relate to, rather than, this sort of medicalization of pain, which is, sometimes just puts another barrier around
yeah,
the human connection that all of us are craving.
no,
And
absolutely, yeah.
and
And
it's, yeah.
no, go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's so I find it so painful. Like, I understand as well because I've also had many Mount Everests, like, personally. But it's so, I often think like there's things in the world that are so sad, like diseases like cancer, heart disease, diseases that we don't have cures for, that are causing pain and harming people and killing people all of the time. And then there's also all this like human suffering and pain, which we do have the medicine
Yeah,
to help alleviate. It sits in you, it sits in me, it sits in every single one of us. And it's so heartbreaking, um, the notion that we can become so removed from that medicine through the experiences that life has given us, and that we as communities become so individualized and disconnected from our medicinal powers. That's why I absolutely love this sort of these community charities and things like that. And so, this idea that so many people are in pain, um, when there's actually, a sort of an abundance of people and therefore an abundance of potential connection and community with which we could be uh, healing and coming alongside with one another. And then additionally for that, I think there's an additional isolation for men specifically because of the ideas that we have about men, and how isolating a lot of those ideas can leave men. So, and I totally don't as well agree with you, this notion. I think someone called it slow suicides. So these suicides of addiction or eating disorders, or different there are many different ways in which pain can manifest. And
hmm
really, I always say that I study male pain made manifest in suicide, but it's the same sort of uh raw ingredients that may be made manifest in addiction, or other kinds of expressions of what pain does to someone's psychological state, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. But I think what does frustrate me as well is when we compare our pain to somebody else's and compare. It was like, oh, it can't be that bad. No, I'll give it. I think I think it's an example. It's the only one was come up. I remember. I'll be careful. There's someone who's very close to my last. I'll be very, very careful. But they apply for a job and they wanted the DBS or the CBR check, and this was a dream job.
Okay.
And they were like, and I was like, are you going to apply for it? Like the deadline's getting. It was like, no, I can't do it. So why? So oh, because I've got a criminal record. I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. Well, what did you do? And they're like, oh, it was when I was like 15. They got in a scrap at school and they got taken to the police station. I was like, so you'll take it. That was a caution. You wasn't arrested. You're 15. And I was like, because you're 15 now, this is like 10, 20 years later, it'll be wiped off your record. It's not even.
Okay.
And I remember laughing, just like, do you realize that's not even it's literally not even a crime. But in that person's world, their future life of this dream
Yeah.
job, they're in the job now,
Oh, brilliant.
wouldn't have happened. But I literally done the thing of just like, it's not even a crime. I remember laughing. But at that moment in time, that person didn't have a future in the dream job.
Mm, mm.
Have I made an example, a point on that? But I think that's the problem with what I see with mental health. It's just like, okay, well, oh, your wife's left you. Don't worry, get another one. But well,
Carry on.
yeah, no, I'm just trying to pluck out. I'm just thinking of like the 300-400 odd conversation I've had of just whatever else. Just like, I know, oh, you're only in £200. You're only in £200 worth of debt. Don't worry about that. You'll get paid. Wipe it off and all of this stupid stuff.
So you do you mean that the lack of recognition for what somebody's actually feeling?
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
yes, sorry, yeah, sorry, the bleep. I'm turning my heating down. I'm absolutely boiling. So yeah, no, exactly that. It's just comparing. Just so, for example, me, like I don't know, I was raised in care, so I pretty much brought myself up. I used to box. I've done door security, and yeah, I've been nicked and all this kind of stuff. But so for me, I'm quite hardy in certain things.
Mhm.
But because say for example the care system, I'm one of the few ones who've actually done well right out of being raised in care. Like I run a charity, I run a couple of businesses, but I can easily flip that when I see somebody who's at a soup kitchen, they're like, oh, I'm here because I was raised in care. And I remember for a little while I was just like, well, I was raised in care as well. I was given the same, he was given the same chances. No, they weren't.
Yeah.
Do you get me? It's just that
Yeah,
comparative,
yeah,
just
yeah.
because I've been there and done that.
Right. Yeah. You don't know somebody's full story.
Exactly that. And the thing is,
Yeah.
we're also all built completely and utterly different.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem.
Absolutely.
Did it make any sense in the long way?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we live in a real cultural moment, I think, where we're trying to say this group of people has this set of privileges, this set of privileges.
Yeah.
And like you say, we're losing that individual nuance of, you know, I meet you and I read, you know, white male, and then I'm going to go in my mind all these assumptions about who you are, the kind of like power and privilege that you've had, and actually your story is one of, you know, complete in many ways complete opposite of that. And then what it does to a human being when you don't have your pain seen,
Yeah.
I think is so there's so much peace that comes, I think, just from having someone genuinely acknowledge the pain
Absolutely.
that you're in.
Yeah.
And and I mean really acknowledging it, really sitting with it, really allowing it um to exist. And I think that when in the current climate, there's a dangerous lack of space and a dangerous drive of assumptions around people's experience. So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying about that. The context for the individual is so important. And often, you know, I'm sure you hear as well, just people have had unbelievably complicated and painful lives. And
Mhm.
they're and they when you start to hear their story, the fact that they feel like they're struggling to stay in existence makes, makes sense in the context of the amount of, challenges that they've had to endure.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly sad. I think that this is why for us we're going to keep going until one day. I know. Was it you who said 300 years? I remember there was one day where I was saying if I just keep going the way we're going, that one day we'll end up being able to shut down the charity because everybody.
Okay.
Was that you? There was that you in that talk? I think it's somebody at that talk, and somebody said, "Oh,
Okay.
that'll be
300.
300 years." But by the time that people like me or even you, we're just not needed anymore because everyone's talking to each other
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And I think it does. Let me reassess where I was going with that one because the other thing what I've kind of noticed is there is a stigma with men's mental health with society. Let's not beat around the bush, but that I strongly believe that stigma, maybe because of the world I've invented, is absolutely getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Just for maybe yet again, that's just my new world and my new network. But the one thing what I think isn't changing is the stigma within ourselves. And
Absolutely.
I'm absolutely convinced that it's in our DNA. Men are fixers. And if we can't fix a problem, the shame starts to build up and like you were saying, the pain, I think when you say pain, I call it shame, but I think
Okay, same. Yeah,
I
similar.
think so. I think so. I'm trying to process while I'm talking as well.
Yeah,
I think that the biggest battle and the biggest stigma is the shame within that blokes can't fix the problem that they're in,
yeah,
and the only solution is I'm done.
yeah. Um, I think it's really interesting what you said about. So we've just had a paper out at the moment about the some of the barriers men who were suicidal experience around accessing professional support, and a small finding around in that was this sense of shame of seeking help, but a lot of men seem to phrase it as, I don't think it's shameful for men to get help, but I cannot bring myself to do it. So exactly as you kind of described, there's more, they had more permission, they felt that able to give other men, they didn't see it as a bad behavior for men to do, but there was still this internal feeling that they could not bring themselves to do it. And there's sort of and I think it is really difficult, Dan, to know how much of that is biological and how much of that is cultural. I absolutely hear you about the potential that men are more like that impulse to want to fix things and to, but I also think that when you've been told something your entire life, I often compare it to, I'm a woman that grew up in the era of like size zero, and that's what we were told as young girls. Women have to look, be as thin as possible. And now I live in a culture where it's different, and there's a celebration of all body forms and like, but that doesn't mean that all the women I know, we've suddenly just turned a light bulb on in our heads and been like, oh, we're going to be completely comfortable and at ease with our body now, because we've had our entire lives being told a different message. And there's this sort of like a lag almost between these new ideas that you're getting told that are in contradiction to these quite ingrained ideas that you've held over many years. And I think in some ways it's similar with this notion of, men's mental health, men going for help, talking more, and things like that. I think the conversation is shifting, but for so many men, these messages have been so ingrained for so long.
Yeah.
It's, you can't just snap your fingers and go, okay, then. I think there's some groups of men where there's still huge consequences for them if they did speak out. I think that as women, we are also learning about how to be alongside men who are struggling, how to be good sisters, good friends, good partners in how to do that. We need to improve the help that's available so that it's tailored for men. Like you said, if men are more focused on wanting to fix problems and come to solutions, then is, how can talking therapy be packaged to fit that kind of goals? Also, if somebody feels like they've got problems with job or with debt or sort of more practical things, then the notion of talking therapies doesn't necessarily compute with the solutions that they may need, that they feel they need in their lives. So
well, yeah, that I would agree with, because I remember a couple of years ago, a veteran,
yeah,
he was really struggling. He was very, very honest. It was just like, I'm just done. And actually, he didn't use the words "I'm going to kill myself." He didn't use those normal words what people are looking out for. And but after reading his messages, this is all MANUP. After reading his messages and then looking at his profile, I had to make the decision to do a safeguarding, a welfare check with the police. I remember Kent Police are brilliant. Actually, I've spoken to most of the police forces, sadly, but Kent are absolutely amazing. And whatever else. So that they did all this, and then they phoned me back and they were just like, "Oh, what charities do you recommend? Like, should I just send them to the Samaritans?" I was like, "No, do not send him to the Samaritans." And they're like, "Why is that?" I went, "Because he's a veteran. He needs to speak to he needs to speak to other veterans. I signposted him to like combat stress and a couple of other ones." And I think
wow,
that's that. I think this is where we're in that dangerous world yet again, where everything is, and there's nothing wrong with the Samaritans. Absolutely,
yeah,
I don't mean that thing.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah,
like, some people, if they've got an eating disorder,
yes,
there's no point sending them to mine. Send them to people who can actually, up to a point, understand or relate a little bit to them.
100%. And again, Dan, I think that's why it's so important what you're doing.
Yeah.
And and so the power and value of that. And I find evidence for that all the time, like the power of the sort of peer support groups. And this is what I think, Dan, I have to say, and it gives me so much life. Is this exquisite movement, I think, in the UK, of these grassroots, often male-led organizations of men saying no more, basically, and what are
Yeah.
we going, exactly as you've done with your charity, like what are we going to do? And this energy that men have to take care of one another,
Yeah.
to look out for one another, and do it in a way and in a language and a framework that makes sense for men. And I think it's so, like, absolutely, like, beautiful and glorious, and there's an abundance of uh care that I witness from men towards other men that I don't think also we kind of celebrate sufficiently in our kind of communities and cultures. But it's really, it gives me so much hope. You know, these individual people that have just, can't tolerate the despair of a situation anymore, and like trying to do something meaningful and productive to change it. And then the courage that it takes, as we were going back earlier saying, for the men that engage with those groups, who climb that personal Mount Everest, to say, I want my life to be different.
Yeah.
Let me try this and see if this can help, if not for myself, for the other people around me. Like, that's what I think. What we were saying earlier about, like, men want to fix problems or find solutions, and often, like, for me, I have men in my life that won't go for help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they're real protector men. And I think the best thing that you could do to protect me is to go for help, because, as as one of the people that loves you deepest, I want to see you well, and
Yeah.
you being well is the greatest protection that you can give me in my life. And so it's also, how we, and that, no, that, we live in a culture that's very quick to demonize men, and we forget to celebrate the many sort of beautiful contributions that men and masculinity have made to society, and that impulse to kind of protect, which of course people of all genders have, and I'm not saying it's a male only thing, but it isn't, you know, it is a really beautiful quality that has contributed so much to you know, the human story. And I see that impulse for protection in these community groups, these grassroots charities, in your work, Dan. Like it's glorious.
No, it is, and yeah, it's something. Yeah, again, what we preach about, just as long as you're dealing with your mental health, it doesn't matter how you do it. And so, for example, I'll bug off. I'll do the wild camp and I race motorbikes. I know people who go and live in the woods for like 2 weeks at a
Yeah.
time and stuff like that, or they do the cold water therapy. Which, yeah, again, with me, I've done our ambassador, or one of our ambassadors, he does cold water therapy, and he absolutely swears by it. I think it's a load of bollocks. I've done it. I've been there on Christmas Day at 6 o'clock in the morning with ice and all this kind of stuff. But you know what? I'm not there to judge him. I've tried it. I've done it.
Yeah,
I'm
and
going
it's not
again
for
this year.
you.
If it works for him, then good on him. And now he gets like 70 odd people, I think, every day, every single day, 6:30 at Felix OC.
Wow.
Well, so, I've had a sniper. I think it was a sniper. He started a knitting group.
Oh wow.
It's crazy. And I went to, I was just like, what the bloody, you don't expect him to start a knitting group. And yet, and I was like, well, you just don't look the type. He goes, no, I hate knitting. Well, why do you start a bloody group at your local library? And it's like, well, because the leader got ill. It sounded like some old lady who got ill, just wanted to call it a day. He took it over and he was like, I get to sit around a few old ladies, and then towards the end, I get to speak to the husbands who come and pick him up.
Right.
It's really, it's such a weird thing.
Clever.
And I'm like, do you know, well done to you, mate.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And he's built that little network. And I think,
that's beautiful.
but this is why, again, this is why those groups and all this kind of stuff, I massively applaud them. Because yeah, you should always speak to your partner and speak to your family, but sometimes they're not the best people to speak to find a new network.
Dan, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I think that's such an important message. Is and there is not a one size fits all way for dealing with your mental health and with your pain. So you've got to figure out what works best for you. I'm exactly the same. Like I you know, I personally, you know, I had a period of quite a lot of therapy, which is very helpful for me. But it doesn't mean that I want to go around now to manage my mental health, talking to everyone about my problems. What it does is it's helped me have a much better internal conversation with myself and with
Yeah.
like um regulating what's going on for me. So I think it's, you know, it's absolutely and there's opportunities everywhere in your community just to look around and see, like this guy you've just described, seeing, oh, this is knitting circle, there's an opportunity here where I can do something to like be of service to people. And I also think the other thing that's really important, Dan, is that there's no, for me, like divide between wellness and wellness in terms of people. Like
Mm.
I'm somebody that I will be managing my mental health, as will everybody else, their entire lives. And there's going to be highs and lows, and my strategies for you know, regulating my mental health will be good strategies. Sometimes there'll be bad ones. I'll have to
Mm.
modify them because things that worked for me in the past are going to stop working. And so it's not that there's kind of like this point that you reach of like, I'm okay now kind of thing. I find that
Absolutely.
it's a, you know, a lifelong kind of relationship. But definitely I find something that helps my mental health is getting out of my head in terms of being alongside other people as much as
Yeah.
possible in terms of
Because that's what I was going to ask you just before. There's that thing of drawing to a close as well. But it's just we always end the videos like how do you look after your mental health? And actually, I guess you're up to a point the same as me. You're constantly surrounded by stories of people dying. Like I think you've answered it really, but how do you not take that on?
Dan, I'd be lying at times to say, I mean, I've had, it's really isolating what I do. I spend a lot of time alone with a lot of heavy things,
Yeah,
and the pain can break your heart. Like it's hard to stay calm, um you know, when you're hearing about so many shitty things that have happened to people, and they've not got the right support, and they are then moving in these society and cultures that aren't hearing their pain. And when you're right next to that pain and you're hearing it so loudly, you become so kind of desperate to get other people to just hear it as well. So there's definitely times that where it is really, it's incredibly emotional. But like I said, I'm so enriched by the amount of beautiful conversations that I've had, and I'm sure you experience exactly the same. Like they, the men that I speak to are so articulate and eloquent about their pain and their shame and their isolation, and they will tell you, I think they'll exchange so much intimacy with you, and it's a real, it's just what makes life meaningful to me. Like, it's just what our ability to be alongside one another. Like, life is, it's so fucking hard, Dan, being a human being. It is so hard to be a human being. It's fucking crazy. Like, you're alive, I'm alive, I've got all these thoughts in my brain, all these feelings about myself, about other people, about what's going on in the world, and I've got to somehow manage all of this. And we're sort of floating around this big rock in the solar system, and like, our ability to just be alongside one another in the madness of that, and try and ease each other's pain, within that, and try and not direct our pain, is such a tremendous fuel. Like, your charity, the changes you're making in the world are fueled by your pain. And our pain can go into, in different directions, at different extremes of the spectrum. We can cause so much violence and destruction with our pain. And we can also do unbelievable, medicinal, beautiful, powerful, meaningful things with our pain as well. And so that's, keeping that balance, moving your pain in the direction of that light is, important to me. I'm so lost on that tangent, Dan. I don't know where.
Oh no, it's absolutely fine. So it's just your life through your perspective, isn't it? Really. I think you've answered the question as well. And I think with me, I have therapy three, four times a month and all sorts, mainly because of those checks. They're the ones.
Right.
They're the ones I really struggle with, the online stuff and the fundraisers. I think it's because I'm not really involved, like Just Giving, they deal with all of that. But when you get a letter from a funeral home, sometimes with a letter, with like a letter from, and they're basically all saying, just help us stop this story from happening again. And then what I find really bizarre. I don't know how to say it in a nicer way, but I'm just going to say it, is mums. They're the ones. They'll especially on social media, they'll always send a photo of the son, the last photo of them being alive, and that's incredibly sad. But I think that's where I decided to go. I think, like you said, about turning a pain into a positive, because I generally feel the pain. You must get it yourself. You feel,
oh my God, yeah,
you feel that pain of that mum or whatever else. And all I can do is, I can't bring that boy, I can't bring that person back. I can try, if I can just try and help save one more.
Yeah.
And that's why that's how I keep going.
Yeah.
But that's all I can do. I can't fix mental health. None of us can. The NHS certainly can't, but we can all, I don't know, I've just got the attitude is, I'll keep chipping away in my little world.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, I think I've said this before, it's like the stigma bubble. It's just like the stigma bubble. If we can get all of our networks and all of our groups, we may not even see eye to eye, but if the bigger our own little groups, and we start bouncing between each other's groups from time to time, that stigma bubble will eventually get smaller and smaller and smaller. I think, and this is why we're a massive collaboration charity. You'll have people in your world, you'll have people in your world, I've got people in my world, and if we can show people, if we could show what people are like, even though we wouldn't normally get on with them, they wouldn't normally, I don't know, say for
Cross
example,
paths, or yeah,
no, that's it. Say for example,
yeah.
our ambassador Ben, he's very much in that art. He's very much in that. He was on the talk, Ben.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so little Ben. I remember he's very much in the LG. I'm not going to say letters because I'll probably.
LGBT, yeah,
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 he's very big in that world. He's
yeah,
there drawing and paper balloons, and he kills me for saying that. I'm sure he doesn't. So he does all of that arty farty stuff, as I call
yeah,
it. And other than outside of Man Up, I would never associate with
yeah,
people like that because it's just not my world. Actually,
yeah.
and we're arguably a masculine charity. He's now an ambassador,
That's
and
beautiful.
we share stuff and whatever else. And it just, I don't know where I'm going on a tangent now. It just works.
Yeah. And do you feel your life richer, Dan, for that, for having the, suddenly you've got access maybe to people and perspectives and conversations that potentially,
Oh yeah, no, without question, yeah. But one of the things what does make me incredibly sad is I don't know. There was something with my own. There was something with my son. Actually, he watches this stuff. He won't mind. There was something with my son where we were trying to get something. I'm going to be careful what I say. We're trying to get something like no, there's no resources, blah blah, and all of that kind of stuff. We just can't do it. And then I'm like, I'm going to play the charity card. I was like, oh well, because what was it? They were like, how do you know so much? I was like, here's my window. I was like, I run a quite a well-known charity, and then as soon as they started googling, they're like, oh, that's you. He suddenly got the help he needed,
okay,
and I've seen that a lot, hell of a lot, where and that does make me incredibly sad
yeah,
with that because there's so many people out there who
that don't have that lever
just
to
don't have that.
pull.
Just, yeah, absolutely, and that makes me completely and utterly sad.
Yeah,
But I would say 99% of the time, actually, my life's massively improved. I'm just being more open. I think the reason now I'm more open about it is my story's been seen in the hundreds of thousands all over. I don't even know what stories are out there now, but it's no one's got anything on me.
yeah,
All I can do is keep going forwards.
yeah.
That's it.
So no one, so it feels quite, do you mean like it's a freeing feeling? Nobody's got anything on me. What do you mean by that? That,
Well, I don't know. It's just like that shame of living with. I've gone from suffering with mental health problems to just simply living with.
yeah,
And yeah, again, like that, I don't know I don't really look at the stats now of the social medias because there's, especially the Facebook is blowing up and up. But I think I hid my demons as a secret because I didn't want people to judge me and I felt quite a lot of shame about it.
mm,
Actually, out of the hundreds of thousands of people over the last few years, probably more than that now, who have seen my story, I've had two people troll me, and I didn't know them anyway.
yeah,
So, and it's made no difference to my life whatsoever. So for me,
mm,
just being a bit more open about stuff, I don't know.
yeah. And so Dan, that suffering with that you had in the past was the suffering with a lot of that suffering was potentially bound up with the isolation that you had because of the shame that
Absolutely, yeah,
kept it
because
hidden.
because I couldn't fix it,
Yeah,
and I think that was it. And once that's all gone, once I outed myself on the BBC, yet again,
yeah.
I really don't recommend anybody do
You're
that
doing that,
whatsoever.
yeah,
Absolutely, that was it was just for me. That was just my moment, and it wasn't planned whatsoever.
yeah,
Yeah, but I think this just shows why talking is so important,
yeah,
and that's so. So
yeah.
just before we draw to close, I just realised
Okay,
we've been going for like nearly an hour.
okay.
This will be the longest video we've ever done on Man Up. So
Wow.
it's but been bloody brilliant. So before we draw to a close, then I always end the video like if somebody's watching this, they're I hate that term these days, but triggered or let's face it, there'll be people when we upload it sometime on the weekend. There will be some men, sadly, what will be thinking about doing something in a
Mm,
few days. They're probably going to be planning something. What would you say to them? I know it's a hard one to answer, but what would you say to do?
Gosh, I mean, the first thing I would say, Dan, is I know that the level of pain you're in when you're at the point of planning to end your life, even if you're feeling quite calm or quite focused on that, but beneath that, the level of pain is so brutal and horrendous, and the pain that's accumulated in your life for you to get to that point. So, I mean, the first thing I would say to them is just that my heart absolutely goes out to them, that they've had a life that's brought them to that point, and that, just that I am deeply sorry that that has been their experiences, and that is the amount of pain that someone is in. And I think you cannot tell someone what to do with their pain. And I cannot promise someone that there's help immediately available on their doorstep if they went to the doctors, that they're going to get help. I don't know those things. I don't know who's in their life that could be of support, but I know that there are an abundance of people that care deeply about that person's pain. You care deeply about their pain. You were turning your life upside down, trying to start an accidental charity. My work is all about trying to understand that pain and trying to figure out what we can do differently to stop that pain escalating to that point. I care deeply about that pain. I know that other people listening care deeply about that pain. So the sort of primary things that I would say would be about that I'm, genuinely deeply sorry for that level of distress, and to know that there are people that care deeply about that, and that it's such a fog when that distress descends. That's what I experience. It's a fog, and I cannot see my next foot ahead of myself. And then but then I have to remember, in that time, all I need to think about is the next foot and the next foot. I can't look beyond that, because when I look up, I can't see anything. So just keep thinking about that next foot, that next foot, that next foot. And the important thing that I didn't mention about that at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about that theory that I liked about the baseline risk and acute suicidal mode. And the critical thing about when you're in an acute suicidal mode is that the feeling is so intense, it cannot be sustained. So it's like if you imagine someone at the gym lifting a really heavy weight, your body cannot hold that weight indefinitely because it's too much. Eventually you have to put it down. And the same is true when you're in that acute suicidal mode. The body cannot sustain that heightened state of pain. So if in that time you can just focus on the one step in front of the next, eventually that fog starts to dissipate. And it may only be for a short time before it comes back again, but there will be a reprieve. And that, when you're in that fog, that priority is just to sustain your safety as best you can. But it's really difficult to know, Dan, what everyone's got an individual way in which strategies for dealing with those things. As we were saying earlier, what works for one person, cold water dunking, isn't going to work for somebody else. So you have to sort of figure out that for yourself. And I know it is so hard when you're in that level of pain to even just be focusing on the one step in front of the other. So I find it's really hard to talk about these things because you make it, people talk about it as if they're easy things to do. And sometimes it's the fucking hardest thing in the world, just to get that, I mean, metaphorically, that just keep looking at the next foot in front of each other, but for me, it's really powerful for me to hold on to the notion that it passes. And it doesn't mean that I won't go back into it again, but to know that that these are time limited episodes, and the times when I'm out of it are the periods in which I can seek to make the bigger changes to try and move me away from that point. But when you're in the fog, do what you need to do to help keeping your foot in front of the next. And often, you know, I know I'm going on slightly, but like those Mount Everests that we have in our minds, the thing that breaks my heart is that when you actually start walking that mountain, you realize it wasn't that high.
Yeah.
When you start speaking those things out loud to someone, you realize it wasn't that difficult. It's fucking scarier, the thought that I never spoke them, than the actual act of
Yeah.
speaking them. So
Well, it's like that old saying. It's a saying it's a saying I used to hate, but now I get it. It's always the first hurdle.
yeah.
And I've said this many times now. Actually, it's just like once you do that first hurdle, I don't know. So, for example, it's me flipping over, so I apologise. But say, for example, like your studies and all this, you went back 20 years, didn't you?
Yeah, we looked at 20 years of research, yeah.
Because the main thing is, and yeah, again, I'm quite adamant. I'm happy to be wrong. Is once you've gone over that first hurdle, and we say this, it's just when you go from suffering from to living with mental health issues, life doesn't matter what it is. Yeah, you're that depression will sometimes creep back. The anxiety sometimes will creep back, but you'll never ever get all the way back down to where you were when you first had that eureka moment. And I've had a couple of people say, "Oh, it's easy for you to say." I'm like, "No, it's not." Yeah, I run a mental health charity. Yes, I have therapy and all of this wonderful stuff. But people don't see me when I'm absolutely struggling and completely and utterly burnt out and stuff like that. But and I haven't been proven wrong yet. And many people have said the same thing. Is yeah, life goes a bit up and down and sometimes utter shit, but they never go back to that complete darkness at
Okay.
that tipping point. Did you notice that on your survey, if that made any sense?
I've not explored that issue kind of directly.
Okay.
It's an interesting question. I mean, I have spoken anecdotally to people that I think have gone gone back into very dark moments, having been but I think again it's so individual that it's so difficult to sort of speak in a
It's hard,
general
yeah.
way about it. But I do absolutely agree that those first steps are often, I think the thing is I don't often hear people go, oh, it gets harder speaking about how I feel.
Yeah.
Like once they've started talking, it's
They deal with
um
it.
yeah, you
Yeah,
find you find the language for it, and you acclimatize to that feeling. Because when you listen, it's fantastic. Talking is of course important, but there is feelings afterwards when if you've held something um so tightly for so long and then it leaves your body, it is that can be a scary, out of control kind of
yeah,
feeling. So it's not always that it's like a completely like unicorns and dancing, but there is this release that can't, it's that pain is just slightly brought down from where
yeah,
you're trying to bring it down from um where it was. But and I think it's an interesting thing, Dan, around, because we've spoken a bit about maybe that men have this impulse that they want to fix things, and I'm interested in how you because a couple of other men that I've spoken to have been like, this realization that I don't fix my mental health, I live with.
yeah.
And so do you so that how do you situate that kind of like potential impulse to fix things with an acceptance of this can't be fixed in its entirety, it has to be sort of long-term managed? Does that make sense what I'm
It does, yeah. But I think throughout my stuff, it just like I guess not knowing what was wrong. Like why couldn't I get out of bed, or why is it, I don't know, say for example, many times I was DJing in fact in between 100 people to 5,000 people. My biggest one was 7,000 700 audience. And I remember looking down at this thing at like I think it's like 7,000, and I was like a mini god.
yeah, wow,
Everybody rah, rah, rah. And then I come off a set, I was just like, that was a shit set. Absolutely.
right,
Yeah, I was doing all of the dancing and whatever else and getting the crowd going, but I was just like, I've just completely, and everyone was like, Dan, that was absolutely amazing. And I'm like, Why can't I feel? Why can't I feel that? And I guess up to a point, I still get it even with MANUP, where people are like, do you know how many lives a charity saved and all this kind of stuff, and everyone else. There's still something in me where I just can't quite accept it, and I don't know whether that's like a mental health thing or I think I've lost myself. So have I made sense?
No, Dan, I totally understand and I relate completely. I
Yeah,
mean, I feel the same. It's like this just sort of numbness about yourself, and
yeah,
almost like the nicer the things that people would say about you, the worse it makes me feel about
yeah. No,
myself.
absolutely.
Almost.
I'm not the only one, thankfully.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one, so absolutely. But it's just, I don't know. But I think I just realised I just wanted to just get rid of that shame of like the depression. I just couldn't work out what it was. So was yeah, again, me announcing to arguably the world, was it the wrong way of doing it? Probably. I don't advise anybody doing it. It was just that's how it happened. That's how it happened with me, and I'm really really glad it did.
Me
Really,
too.
there was just I don't even know what that shame was, but it massively a lot of it had been removed. And then yet again, I had my other eureka moments when I started building a much stronger bond with my children. So now I'd like to think that my own children going forwards, they'll be more open with their partners when they're older and all this kind of stuff as well. So the knock-on effects
Mm.
will just keep going and going and going.
100%. And that's when you climb those Mount Everest and do that speaking and the sharing, you don't know what other climbers you're helping in their Mount Everest journey through
Exactly. Yeah.
experiencing and witnessing. And that's
Yeah.
that's the power and beauty that we
Exactly.
hold.
Just everyone just keep talking. Just keep talking and the world eventually in 300 years
Yeah.
will be a much better place. And I can't wait for the day we can just shut down MANUP because there'll be no need for it.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
But on that bombshell, because I'm just conscious of that time, and it's me, the poor
Yeah.
who's got to edit the bloody thing as well, and a bus. So how would people be able to follow you or find out about your PhD and all this kind of stuff? How would one stalk you on the internet?
Told me. The best way is to so got an Instagram page, which I think is male_suicide_research.
I'll do the tag on that as well.
So all right, thanks, Dan. So trying to share, trying to create kind of accessible kind of guides to all the work that we're finding, because then the work belongs to the people, Dan. For me, the work belongs to the people. So at the moment, we've sort of got these papers published in academic journals, but like, how do we translate that and get that information into the hands of the people? Because I think that there's part of many things need to happen, but one of those things I think is helpful is for people to have better information about what's going on for themselves and a better understanding of that. So that's a real I was terrible at going off on tangents. You just asked me for
You're
my
not the only
Instagram
one,
page.
so that's fine. Yeah. Hence why we've been going for an hour. Yeah.
That's it. That's where they can find me.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love hearing from people. So
Absolutely.
please get in touch.
I'll do all the taggy stuff and whatever else. But I really appreciate your time, and hopefully somebody who's if they're watching this, if it changes one mind about stuff, then the whole thing's worth it.
Don't it be beyond words.
Absolutely.
Beyond words.
Let me hit that on record, that stop record
Okay.
button.